Good evening. I'm Leland Vittert. Hope you had a great holiday weekend and managed to enjoy it without the wild fears of Omicron, the latest COVID variant. I say wild because there is zero evidence to support fear, much less the media-fueled panic. Hopefully you had something better to do this weekend than watch TV. Here is just a bit of what you missed.
A pandemic-weary world plunged into uncertainty with the discovery of a new variant.
The World Health Organization is warning the risk of potential surges is quite high.
We have inklings that this is easy to give and get, easily transmissible, possibly more than Delta.
Here in New York, the governor has declared a state of emergency taking effect later this week to increase hospital capacity.
This morning, more countries are taking drastic measures to avoid the spread of a newly discovered variant of the coronavirus.
If you weren't scared, maybe you are now. That's not to say there aren't reasons to be cautious or thoughtful or to learn more, but the lunacy we heard over the weekend appears, at least right now, to be unfounded. Most news programs are about what we know. Let's talk now about what we don't know. We don't know if Omicron is actually that new. It could have been in South Africa for a while. We don't know if it's any more deadly than normal COVID. In fact, there are reasons to believe it's not. A South African doctor says patients with Omicron and that variant have, quote, very mild symptoms. We've been able to treat these patients conservatively at home. Most predominant clinical complaint is severe fatigue for 1 or 2 days. Next, we don't know if current vaccines and natural immunity, i.e. those that have already had COVID, work against this variant.
Well, the key question is whether or not this escapes immunity and whether or not that escape is contributing to its perceived rapid spread. I think that's going to be the key question to nail down, and whether or not the vaccines are protective and whether or not the immunity offered by prior infection with Delta is going to be protective.
By way of saying, if we find out that Omicron is more deadly than normal COVID and escapes the vaccine, sure, be afraid, even very afraid. But we just aren't there yet. And President Biden today seemed to indicate he had reason to believe being afraid is an overreaction.
I'll be putting forward a detailed strategy outlining how we're going to fight COVID this winter, not with shutdowns or lockdowns, but with more widespread vaccinations, boosters, testing, and more.
Not with shutdowns or lockdowns. We'll get to the why in that in a minute. Speaking of boosters and vaccines, the administration's vaccine mandate is falling apart, literally, both for private businesses and even for federal employees. CNN reports the administration tells some agencies they can delay firings of unvaccinated federal employees until after the holidays. There are a few reasons for that, namely interviews of people fired before Christmas does not do much for a president whose approval rating right now is in the low 40s. Shutdowns also don't do much for a president whose approval ratings are in the low 40s. But the Biden administrations are also pausing the rollout of the private employer vaccine mandate. So one must wonder if the administration realizes COVID is better than the headlines suggest. However, President Biden put in a travel ban for 8 African countries. You can see them here: Zimbabwe, Malawi, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, and South Africa, among a few others. If you are old enough to remember a time when travel bans to keep COVID out was called racist, well, you aren't alone. Here's Joe Biden's tweet from February of 2020 when then President Trump banned travel. Trump further diminished the U.S. in the eyes of the world by expanding his travel ban. This new African ban is designed to make it harder for black and brown people to immigrate to the United States. A disgrace, and we cannot let him succeed. That was candidate Joe Biden. Here's Frank Luntz explaining how Biden's is exactly the same. You can see this. Countries with confirmed Omicron variant cases, as Frank Luntz pointed out, include Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Italy, Israel, Hong Kong, the UK, Netherlands. None of those are on the ban. The African countries, an African ban is part of Mr. Biden's travel plan. We start with Kellie Meyer in Washington tonight as the White House tries to show it is in control without appearing to backtrack on the pandemic ahead of the holidays. Kellie, good evening.
Good evening, Leland. Well, the president today tried to ease Americans' fears surrounding this new variant. He is continuing to press them to get vaccinated, to get the booster shot. He's also encouraging them to wear masks indoors and in crowded spaces, but he stopped short of calling on states to implement new mask mandates. As you mentioned, he is saying no shutdowns or lockdowns for now, but he did implement those travel restrictions against 8 African countries.
We needed time to give people an opportunity to say, get that vaccination now before it's going to move around the world. I think it's almost inevitable there will be, at some point, that strain here in the United States.
And Biden says he doesn't anticipate putting additional travel restrictions in place, but he didn't rule it out. Leland?
They didn't rule it out. There's also a lot of thought that the Omicron variant is already in the United States. We just don't know it yet. As we noted, President Biden was pretty critical of President Trump's travel ban. We'll put the tweet back up. Trump further diminished the U.S. in the eyes of the world by expanding his travel ban. This new African ban is designed to make it harder for black and brown people to immigrate to the United States. It's a disgrace, and we cannot let him succeed. How is the White House explaining that it was racist when President Trump did it and just fine when President Biden did it?
Well, the White House today defended the president's travel ban and his past criticism of the previous administration. When pressed by reporters here today, the White House press secretary had this to say.
What the president was critical of was the way that the former president put out, I believe, a xenophobic tweet and how he called what he called the coronavirus and who he directed it at. The president has not been critical of travel restrictions. We have put those in place ourselves. We put them in place ourselves in the spring.
Leland, the White House says they are sticking to advice from medical experts, which is how they say they got to their decision to increase this travel ban or add this travel ban against these 8 African countries.
All right. Kellie Meyer at the White House tonight. Kellie, thank you. President Biden ran on getting COVID under control, you might remember. He told everybody he would be the adult in the room. But his top medical advisor just told everyone under control, getting COVID under control, might now be in the eye of the beholder.
We certainly are not going to eradicate it. We've only eradicated one virus, and that's smallpox. Elimination means there's none of it in the country like we have now with polio and with measles. I don't think we're going to be there with this.
Phil Wegmann covers the White House for RealClearPolitics and joins us now. Phil, good to see you. Is the White House figured out where the COVID goalposts are, or are they just kind of running along?
I think what we heard from Dr. Fauci in that soundbite is a reflection of the fact that because there are going to be animal reservoirs when it comes to this virus, it might be something that we just don't get away from. It might become endemic and something that we have to prepare for throughout the year. The problem with that, though, is that there are a lot of people who are ready to move on completely from this. They've lived through the pandemic for a year and a half, and they don't want to be told that every fall and every winter that they're going to have to take different precautions. They're ready for enough to be enough.
And this sort of gets to the point of what is the goal, right? Because if we're never going to end COVID, there's going to be old immunocompromised people who die of COVID just like they die of the flu every year or die of pneumonia every year. Is there any sense from the White House and understanding, perhaps, of how kind of irritated the American people are every time they hear about new restrictions?
I think there is. They're certainly looking at the president's poll numbers, like you mentioned earlier in the segment. They know that he's polling in the low 40s, and a lot of that is a result of the Delta variant. And they're certainly worried about what the next variant is going to do to his approval rating. But I think that what they're confronting right now is that they are trying to deal with a biological problem. The fact that this virus might not be going away, but it's not just something that you're dealing with in a laboratory or in an academic white paper. Now this is very much a political problem, and it's not going to be going away.
Yeah.
This is something that we're going to be dealing with for years to come.
Yeah, and every part of it now has become politicized, especially when it has to do with Dr. Fauci. Take a listen.
So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, so it's easy to criticize. But they're really criticizing science. Because I represent science. That's dangerous.
We'll just move on and acknowledge the hubris in that statement. But nevertheless, how convinced is the White House that Dr. Fauci is really continuing to be the right voice here after sound bites like that?
Well, Fauci and this president are joined at the hip. I don't think that there's going to be any divorce between the two of them. But the clip that you just played, it shows that the doctor, he has been continuing this "I am one with the science and the science is one with me" routine. The problem with that is that a lot of voters are getting frustrated because they see decisions that he made over the last year and a half, which weren't the result of the scientific consensus, whether it was the noble lie of masks early in the pandemic or whether it was him sort of going with his gut feeling on the question of herd immunity, something that he admitted to the New York Times that he sort of fudged those numbers, or whether now it's his hope that the virus originated in a wet market, something that even the Chinese government no longer subscribes to. I think that this routine that Fauci continues to do, certainly there is room for criticism, and so long as the White House keeps him close, it is room for criticism of this administration as well.
Yeah, the linkage of those two is well put. My mother might say about Dr. Fauci, seldom right, but never in doubt. Phil, good to see you, my friend. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. The politics of COVID, of course, cuts both ways. 4 GOP-run states are now offering ways for people to get around the workplace mandates, even if it's a private employer putting in the mandates. Lawmakers in Florida, Iowa, Kansas, and Tennessee have changed the rules for unemployment benefits so people who've been fired for refusing the vaccine or who quit in some cases because they don't want to get the vaccine can receive money. Joining us now, Texas Republican strategist, host of the 13-Minute News Hour, Bobby Eberle, and Brian Mudd, host of The Brian Mudd Show from Florida. Brian, start with you. The idea that you're going to pay people who quit their job violates like 9 different conservative principles. Is this really worth bowing to the anti-vax crowd for that?
I think it's about something that's bigger than that issue alone. When Florida made this move, they didn't just make a move on unemployment benefits. They actually, we became the first state in the country that recognized natural immunity as equitable to being vaccinated. Florida held a special session where they signed 4 new pieces of legislation into law. Governor DeSantis did. And among them, these protections for those that are unemployed came into play. But truth be told on this deal, Leland, 16% of Florida's workforce potentially was in the crosshairs of the Biden vaccine mandate. And if that were allowed to stand, which is what this special session was about, that these unemployment benefits came under, then you wipe them out. And you think you got supply chain issues now.
These are two totally different things, because if you wipe those 16% out and they get fired, they're fired. You're going to have supply chain issues anyway. Then you're going to pay them unemployment benefits. It seems kind of like a colossal waste of money to pay people who voluntarily quit. But I get sort of the concept, Bobby. But what's next? If you quit because your employer's health plan requires a vaccine, what's next? You get to quit because you don't like your boss's political views, or that your boss donated to a certain candidate, and you still get unemployment benefits? Where does it stop?
Right. Yeah, I see where you're going with this, Leland, but you got to see the point. I think what they're doing, I think this is a strategy involved. I mean, these are, GOP type states, red leaning states that probably the most employers aren't going to push a vaccine mandate anyway. What they're doing is they're sending a message that we're not going along with this Biden vaccine mandate. People are tired of it. They want to move on. Your summary earlier on how all of the vaccine mandates.
I hate to interrupt you, though, but it's not necessarily the Biden vaccine mandate. This is about even employers who are putting in their own mandate, irrespective of the Biden mandate, which is not going to be enforced for the foreseeable future.
Well, right, but there's a limit to what they are doing. Like in the Florida one, all they're saying, because I'm a conservative, right? I want businesses to follow conservative principles. If I say that a business shouldn't be able to, bake a cake, shouldn't have to bake a cake, then I also should say that businesses should be allowed to put whatever safety precautions they feel are appropriate. But the limit for me, and I believe others too, is forcing someone to inject themselves with a chemical, especially if natural immunity is actually better than the vaccine. That's where I draw the line, and I think that's what a lot of these policies are doing too. I'm all for businesses doing what they want to do to protect themselves, but you can't force people to inject themselves with a chemical.
All right, so Bobby, this is people who say, I quit in Florida because I don't want to get the vaccine, they should be able to get unemployment for how long?
Oh, I would definitely limit that because, I mean, there's plenty of businesses out there that are going to not have it. So I'd say 3 to 6 months, find the other job. The economy is booming in places like Texas and Florida. There's jobs for the taking.
Brian, we'll put that map back up of the states that are involved. Iowa, Florida, among others. Mandates are banned in Tennessee and in Montana, so it's kind of a moot point. Mandates are permitted with exceptions in Florida and Alabama. So is there anything, if people quit their job on a basis of conscience, which essentially the vaccine, not when you get the vaccine is a matter of conscience, should they, no matter why they quit on conscience or principle, be able to get unemployment?
So you want to talk about principle, and the one thing I would add to what's been said is it was nobody's condition of employment whenever they went to work for whomever they went to work for that you would get injected with the COVID-19 vaccine, right? There are different circumstances that have come into play here, and now you're changing the landscape when you talk about vaccine mandates. And my point, Leland, is that yes, on the unemployment benefits, but what Florida has now done has essentially made it illegal for private employers to be able to institute vaccine mandates. Disney, they had a vaccine mandate in place in Florida. They repealed it as soon as the law went into place, and employers clear across the state are. So the unemployment benefits are now a moot point because the mandates aren't going to be enforced and people aren't going to be fired for COVID-19 vaccination.
So far, at least, we haven't really seen them be enforced on a broad basis. You make a great point about Disney, how quickly they backed down from Governor DeSantis on this. Bobby, Brian, great conversation, gentlemen. Thank you both. We appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks.
Good seeing you.
Good to see you. The Ghislaine Maxwell trial opens in New York. So, will she take the stand and what she might say? Plus, tragedy or terror? Some in the media are choosing their words very carefully when it comes to the Waukesha massacre. We think we know why. See if you agree when we come back. Seven children are still in the hospital in Waukesha, Wisconsin, more than a week after police say a career criminal intentionally plowed his SUV into a Christmas parade, killed 6, injured dozens. And some of the media are now facing criticism for how they are framing the story of what you're watching happening right there and how they're treating the suspect, Darrell Brooks, specifically in ignoring his troubled past and possible motives, including some fairly troubling social media posts. CNN is taking flack for a tweet saying a, quote, car drove through a city Christmas parade. The Washington Post called it a tragedy caused by an SUV, as if it was the SUV itself to be blamed for this. Here's what we know so far on the sequence of events that led to the Waukesha tragedy caused by an SUV. So if it was an autonomously driving SUV and it plowed through a parade, that tweet would have been correct. The Washington Post did delete the tweet. Newsweek simply called it a Christmas parade crash, as if it was a crash that spontaneously happened. It was an accident. We bring in Dan O'Donnell, host of the Dan O'Donnell radio show in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who has covered this story extensively. All right, Dan, what gives?
I think the media is not covering this story for what it is because, quite frankly, there is a narrative to protect, and there's no one in the media who has the courage to call this story what it was, and that is a potential act of domestic terrorism. It's sort of like none dare call it treason, none dare call it terrorism. It seems abundantly clear from the evidence that's been presented to prosecutors, and now the suspect, Darrell Brooks, has been charged with a 6th homicide, that he went to this parade with the intention of killing as many innocent people as possible. And there is at least the possibility that there was a racial angle to this.
Yeah, some of Darrell Brooks' social media posts certainly draw into question whether or not he had some real anti-white, anti-Semitic feelings. You think if this was turned around and Darrell Brooks was black rather than white, was white rather than black, and had a MAGA sticker on his car, this would still be a big story in America?
Leland, if he was white and had a MAGA sticker on his car, this would be the only story that MSNBC and CNN cover from now until the end of the year. If you thought the Kyle Rittenhouse trial that Wisconsin just went through a week ago was big, you would not believe if he went to, say, a primarily black neighborhood, or how about the newest American holiday, Juneteenth? We have a Juneteenth parade in Milwaukee. In fact, we've got the nation's oldest Juneteenth celebration. If he plowed into the Juneteenth celebration as a white Trump supporter, are you kidding me? That's all that would be talked about, because the narrative would then be right-wingers are terrorists.
Yeah, well, we're certainly trying to cover it this way, and I know you have on your radio show. Does it just not get traction in the liberal media? Because it doesn't even seem like the conservative media is doing that much on it either.
No, it doesn't, which I think a bigger reason, at least in conservative circles here in Wisconsin, it is still a huge story, although there is a tragic amount of coverage like the Washington Post and CNN, the SUV that caused the tragedy, that sort of thing. But in conservative circles, I think the bigger factor was Thanksgiving, was the fact that we broke for a 4-day weekend and people sort of reset after the holiday weekend. And this story, unfortunately, got lost in the shuffle. But never forget that 6 people are dead. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people are injured because a career criminal who harbored deep anti-Semitic and apparent anti-white sentiment was out on low bail that he posted just days before this attack, and was out on the streets instead of in jail and free to cause a horrific massacre, one of the worst this state has ever seen.
All right, so you think about some of the other headlines, and you make a good point about Thanksgiving because you have this reset, and now we're looking forward and on and on. CBS News, Waukesha holiday parade crash leaves several dead. ABC, holiday parade disaster leaves 5 dead. MSNBC, Waukesha PD chief provides update on Waukesha holiday parade tragedy. People, Waukesha tragedy. As you point out, appears much more to be a attack, quite possibly a domestic terrorist attack. Put the media aside from it just for a minute, because in the end, the media is the media. Do you think there is enough public outcry in Wisconsin that the local officials there, the prosecutor who let him out on low bond, and then the prosecutor is going to end up prosecuting this crime itself, will really look into his background and be willing to ask the tough questions of, what did we miss here? Could this have been prevented? Was this truly racially motivated?
You know, Leland, that's an excellent question. And to be frank, it's not one that I think I can answer in just 30 to 45 seconds. The fundamental problem is that the district attorney who let Darrell Brooks out on low bail, John Chisholm, has been doing this sort of thing for 15 years since he was first elected. In fact, you look at Chesa Bowden in San Francisco and all of the other liberal prosecutors, Chisholm is sort of the originator of this progressive prosecution. Waukesha is a far more conservative community, and this is where the suspect, the killer, is going to be tried. This is probably where there is going to be the question that is at least asked. However, I think the powers that be in both Waukesha and Milwaukee are content to have this be 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, which are punishable by life in prison, no chance of ever getting out.
And just move on rather than actually confront the really tough questions here. You are never afraid to confront the tough questions, and that's why we have you on. We appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you, Leland. You too.
All right. Democrats want President Biden to start swinging at Republicans. Then his allies aren't quite sure if he's got it in him. So we'll ask. The aggressive progressive is next. Welcome back. Democrats are reportedly demanding that President Biden go on the offensive and, quote unquote, turn up the heat on Republicans for opposing his agenda. This is the Politico reports. There's a debate raging in the White House over how hard the president should attack the GOP heading into the midterms. Dems want Biden, as they say, but does he have it in him? The New York Times reports the Democrats are struggling to energize their base as frustrations mount, and are warning the White House and congressional leaders that they are falling short on campaign promises and leaving their base unsatisfied and unmotivated ahead of next year's midterm elections. This all comes as Biden's poll numbers have been sinking, hitting a new low of 38% in a recent USA Today Suffolk University poll. Chris Hahn, host of the Aggressive Progressive podcast, former advisor to Chuck Schumer in the Senate, joins us now. All right. So does President Biden need to take a page from you and be the aggressive progressive?
Oh, I think absolutely. Look, I don't want him to go back to what the former guy was doing, name calling and all that other nonsense. But there's nothing stopping him from going around the country, standing in Republican districts that are going to get benefited from the infrastructure bill and saying, hey, look, your Republican representative didn't want this bridge fixed. He didn't care if it was going to fall apart on your morning commute. Vote that guy out. The president needs to be selling what he's doing. He needs to let Americans know, if you want more of this, you better keep voting Democratic.
Yeah, it's interesting. Part of the headline from Politico, Dems want Biden to start swinging at Republicans. Allies aren't sure he can. And there's a process part of this, right, of how much of this is factions in the White House who aren't being heard or who are a little annoyed leaking to Politico to try to telegraph so then everyone talks about it on TV.
Yeah, I think people just want to feel important, so they leak to the press, whether they're in the White House or their congressional aides or their political consultants out there. They're out there talking to Politico and probably exaggerating their influence. But look, it's clear to me that the Republicans go on the offense all the time. And Democrats play too much defense. And I don't need to tell you, the best defense is a good offense. And Joe Biden needs to go out there and go on the offense, go on the attack, saying these guys are obstructing progress in this country, things we need. Go to a rural community that's about to get internet for the first time ever and say, your Republican congressman voted against this. Yeah, no, Point it out. Go around the country. It'll lead all the newscasts.
Right, and you also have to love that how many of the Republican congressmen are going to show up to ribbon cuttings on the thing they voted against. But we digress. Air Force One makes a lot of noise when it comes to town. President Biden certainly came to town a lot for Terry McAuliffe in Virginia. This was part of President Biden on the stump. Take a listen.
And Terry is running against an acolyte of Donald Trump. He endorses Donald Trump's bad ideas and bad record. Donald Trump is the only president since Herbert Hoover in the 30s to see more jobs lost than gained.
All right, so he was on the attack there. It didn't work.
Yeah. You know, that's about as mean as Joe Biden gets. I think we've got to have some surrogates out there being a little meaner. Look, one of the things I love about Kamala Harris
there were
she's
surrogates
good
who were,
with the knife.
Yeah, Chris, there were surrogates who were as mean as you could possibly imagine in Virginia. I was there on the ground. I've never heard things said as mean and as difficult and as divisive about Glenn Youngkin as were said. It was one of the nastiest races around. They basically called him a closet racist. It didn't work.
Well, Virginia was a historical race, right? You were running against history there. Only one candidate in like the last 60 years of the party in power held on to the governor's race there, and that was Terry McAuliffe in 2019. So, I mean, it's something that needs, not 2019, 2016. I'm getting my years wrong. 2017. So it was a very difficult situation. That doesn't mean that all is lost in 2022. But the Democrats got to wake up. They got to start playing tough. They're playing by a rule book that doesn't exist anymore, frankly. The Republicans have changed the rules, and the Democrats have to get with the game or they're going to lose it.
All right. Well, we can hear about just how aggressive to be on the Aggressive Progressive podcast. Download it on iTunes and Spotify. Good to see you, my friend.
Anywhere you get your podcast.
Anywhere you get your podcast, Chris Hahn is there. Talk to you soon. All right. Moving overseas now, Iran's nuclear program appears to be alive and well as the Biden administration begins talks for a new nuclear deal with Tehran. And the Ayatollah is driving a very hard bargain, demanding a lifting of all Trump-era sanctions before agreeing to stop their work on a bomb. The Jerusalem Post reports Israel is perhaps less than optimistic about a deal or Iran keeping a deal. Israel military readying for Plan B if Iran nuclear talks fail. Having lived in Jerusalem for 4 years during the height of the Iran-Israel tensions, that headline should perhaps be taken more seriously than you might think. Israel really will go it alone to stop Iran's nuclear program, and the parallels to the Obama-era Iran policies certainly scare the new Israeli prime minister. Put it another way, war is a real possibility. Jamil Jaffer served in the Bush administration, worked on Capitol Hill during the last Iran deal, now teaches national security law at George Mason University. Jamil, good to see you. As always, you got to feel like the Israelis are really telegraphing here, just like they did when the Obama administration was in these talks.
Exactly right, Leland. I mean, look, the Israelis have very real concerns. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that is catastrophic for Israel, and they won't allow that to happen. We saw what they did in Syria. We saw what they did with Iraq. They're not going to stand by and watch Iran get a nuclear weapon. And this is one of the challenges here with the Biden administration's policy, which is essentially give up leverage that the Trump administration had gotten the Biden administration. They gave in early on sanctions relief, and now we're in a situation where the Iranians want more and more and more, just like they did with the Obama administration when they were negotiating the original nuclear deal.
Yeah, well, you know the Iranians are lying when their lips are moving, and there's a lot of intel to suggest that they've used the time, especially over the past year, to build more nuclear facilities. What is the obsession among both the Obama administration and now the Biden administration over the concept of having a deal with bad people?
You know, I don't really get it in a lot of ways, Leland. The real challenge here is if you're going to get a deal with Iran, you have to put a lot of other things on the table besides the nuclear program. You have to talk about their regional misbehavior. You have to talk about their support of terrorism. You have to talk about their support for Hezbollah, the Americans they killed in Iraq, right? These are all things that are relevant to the nuclear deal. The Biden administration, just like the Obama administration before it, wants to talk just about the nuclear deal. And frankly, you know, the nuclear deal that the Obama administration negotiated, the Biden administration wants to get back into, has expiration dates that are already coming due in the near future. And so the idea somehow that we get back into a deal that's going to end soon makes no sense. And giving up the leverage the Trump administration got absolutely makes no sense. They should be going and raising sanctions at this point to punish Iran for as far as it's gone in the program and trying to get to a much better deal rather than trying to just go back to the old deal, which was a failure from the jump as it stood.
If we look at the map of the Middle East right now, it's a very different map than it was during the Obama administration because of the Abraham Accords. President Trump's deals to get Israel recognized by additional Arab countries, which we didn't add to the map. But in addition to Egypt and Jordan, you've got Bahrain, you've got the UAE, you've got Morocco, now all signing on to this, Sudan as well. How critical is that? You can also look at Azerbaijan, which is a key Israeli ally. How critical is this change of the map for how things are going to play out with Iran?
Well, look, I think it's a big deal, Leland, and the reason why is you just saw exercises that we held with the Israelis with NAVCENT, that's our Central Command's naval unit. But you know who participated in those exercises with the Israelis and with us? Bahrain, UAE. We've also seen the escort of B-1 bombers by Israelis, by the Saudis, by Emiratis, by the Bahrain Air Force. I mean, this idea somehow that it's just going to be Iran versus Israel or just the U.S. versus Iran, that's a myth. The reality is that Israel and the Arab nations have come together now post-Abraham Accords, and they are allied on preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And that's part of what the Biden administration doesn't seem to understand. They've got great leverage. The Trump administration, for all of its failures on foreign policy or all of its challenges, left us with a great position on Iran. They had the Iranians over the barrel, and they gave up a lot of that right at the outset. Now's the chance to get it back, restore the sanctions, work with our allies, and really push back on the Iranian efforts to get a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons the Emiratis and the Bahrainians signed up was because of how worried they are about Iran. Last question. Are we to believe that the Israelis really would go it alone at this point, or have they been telegraphed by the Biden administration in the way they were from the Obama administration? You attack Iran, America may or may not come to your support.
Look, I mean, the Israelis have been doing this for years. They understand that the United States might not stand behind them, and they've made their decision. They cannot allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Yeah. Iran should understand that and understand that they're going to go down this road. It's going to be a real problem for the Israelis. And frankly, the Israeli allies, all of our Sunni allies in the region, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the like. So more to come on this front for sure, Leland.
Yeah, as the Israelis say, blue and white. Jamil, it's good talking to you. Thanks again.
Thanks, Leland.
All right. Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's longtime girlfriend, may take the stand. The tales she could tell about the little black book when we come back. Few people know more and have said less about Jeffrey Epstein's life as a sexual predator than his accused madam, Ghislaine Maxwell, and we could hear from her shortly. Wow. Epstein rubbed elbows and entertained the very top of world society, presidents, billionaires, and of course royalty. At times, he allegedly provided underage women to perform sexual favors, perhaps to solidify business relationships, perhaps for blackmail, perhaps for both. Many of those women report being scouted and groomed by Maxwell, who was known as Epstein's longtime girlfriend. Epstein died of an apparent suicide as he awaited trial, and today, Maxwell's defense attorney said in opening statements on her trial, Eve was accused of tempting Adam with the apple. Women have been blamed for the bad behavior of men, and women are often villainized and punished more than the men ever are. The charges against Maxwell are for things that Jeffrey Epstein did, but she is not Jeffrey Epstein. The Daily Mail, among others, report Maxwell might be ready to take the stand in her own defense. Investigative reporter Ben Weeder has been following the case closely, to say the least. He works for the McClatchy Washington Bureau and joins us now. All right, Ben, first things first. Who should be most scared if Maxwell takes the stand?
It's an interesting question. I mean, certainly her black book is expected to be discussed at trial. And right now, an old pal of Maxwell's, Prince Andrew, is facing a civil suit in the same Southern District in New York, accusing him of sexually abusing a woman who says that Maxwell had recruited her. So certainly people like Prince Andrew, we could learn more about the abuse he's alleged to have committed. Certainly other high-profile individuals, although Judge Allison Nathan, who's presiding over the case, has indicated that she wants to narrowly focus this on what Maxwell is accused of, and by extension, what Epstein is accused of, but not necessarily open this up to, a laundry list of names. But certainly, it's hard not to think about that Prince Andrew is watching this very closely as he faces his own legal proceeding in the same court.
All right, so you've got the Prince Andrew issue. As far as the charges against Maxwell, are those for recruiting women to provide sexual favors and be abused by Epstein? We say abused because they were under 18. Or were these women allegedly trafficked to other individuals?
Well, the focus has been on Epstein. Prosecutors today painted a picture of Maxwell and Epstein inserting themselves into the lives of troubled young women, befriending them, and then Epstein ultimately abusing them. Certainly lots of these women have accused Maxwell and Epstein of then trafficking them to their prominent friends. But so far we haven't heard that at the trial, and it's unclear whether we will hear that. Certainly the judge has tried to keep the focus narrow. And for the prosecutors, at the end of the day, while we in the press are certainly interested to know about all the other things mentioned, they have their role at the end of the day is to convict Ghislaine Maxwell, not any of her high-powered friends. And so, I think their focus will be narrowly on Maxwell. With that said, it's impossible to paint a picture of who Maxwell and Epstein are, or in case of Epstein were, without mentioning their high-profile friends.
So this brings us to an interesting point. You typically always you get the underlings to flip on the big names, the big fish, if you will. And Maxwell has not, as far as we know, and I believe from your reporting, been offered a deal. Why this lack of interest, conceivably, by prosecutors in uncovering or exposing these other individuals who were frequenting or being provided underage women for sexual favors?
It's a great question. And certainly, they've made clear earlier in the case that the investigation is still ongoing. So there's certainly the possibility that they would ultimately bring charge against other men. But these are hard cases to make. The thing to remember about Ghislaine Maxwell, these are incidents that are alleged to have occurred 20 plus years ago. There isn't a lot of documentary evidence. I think in the case of Maxwell, they were actually, it seems, able to flip some women lower on the chain than Maxwell, and we expect to hear from former employees at the trial who are exactly in that position. But when it comes to other high-powered men, the question really would be, what is the evidence that's there to establish that? And that's challenging. And I think that's going to be an interesting challenge in this case as well. That's what we're, eagerly anticipating. Already there were references today to FedEx packages that Jeffrey Epstein sent to one of the girls. And certainly there are a lot of, references to Black Book, to message pads. There's shreds of evidence that we're aware of. But in most of these cases, there isn't necessarily a lot of physical evidence. So these are not cases to make.
Let me do this quick because we only got another minute or two. If she does take the stand, And if you were a prosecutor, what would be a couple of the questions you'd want her to have to answer under oath?
She has made clear in the past when she's taken the stand in previous lawsuits, she has argued that she had no knowledge of what was occurring. That would be the first thing I would be trying to figure out. She's previously said she had no knowledge of any untoward behavior. If, for example, we don't know what the contents were of the FedEx package, but many women have talked about when they were girls, Epstein would send them gifts like lingerie, things of a sexual nature. That would be a question I would ask her, because if you're claiming ignorance about the abuse that was occurring, how were you not aware of these very sexual gifts, for example, that he was sending them? Those are certainly questions I would want to ask, and I would want to ask about. I would want to really probe the degree to which she has claimed in the past to have been completely ignorant of any abuse, and
allegedly, we say that you have to say allegedly, but allegedly, and we've heard this a number of times, actually engaged in some of the abuse herself with some of these young women. Hey, Ben, great reporting as always. There's going to be a lot to talk about as the trial continues. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
There's been a stunning development we need to tell you about in the search for Haley Schell, we featured last week in our series Missing in America on NewsNation Prime. Her mother brought her home safely from Chicago after finding her with a man who may have been grooming her for abuse. Tonight, Marnie Hughes speaks live with Haley's mother, 9/8 Central. We'll be right back. Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.